So with that in mind, can I please ask that everyone switches their cameras off and sort of remains on mute for the duration of the presentation. We do plan on having some time at the end for a sort of Q&A session. So my name's Leanne Packham and I'm based within HMPPS Women's team, which now forms part of the wider Women's Directorate. I'm really pleased to be able to introduce this event, which is effectively the launch of a new practitioner toolkit for working with women. I just want to provide a little bit of context before we launch in. So we know that the proportion of women in the criminal justice system is relatively small. They make up just 4% of the prison population and 9% of those serving a sentence in the community. It's fair to say that it's taken some time for a system that works predominantly with men to acknowledge the evidence that women have different needs that require a gendered response. It was Baroness Corsten's 2007 report that really shone a light on this disparity by highlighting that equal treatment of men and women does not necessarily result in equal outcomes. We know that on average, women commit less serious offences than men and often pose a low or medium risk of serious harm to the public, and that over 3/4 of women sentenced to custody receive sentences of less than 12 months. The 2018 Female Offender Strategy set out the government's commitment to do things differently, acknowledging the significant vulnerabilities and complexities of women. Whilst we still have some way to go to achieve those equal outcomes, we do believe we are making progress in the right direction. Probation unification has provided us with an opportunity to develop new and innovative interventions that are designed specifically for women. I'm proud that we have practitioners in the service whose knowledge, experience and unwavering passion has led to the development of this amazing toolkit. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our toolkit developers, Angela Orty, Women's Lead for the South West region, and Claire Rushton, the Women's Lead for the West Midlands region, to talk through First Steps to Change, a toolkit for working with women.
Okay, so let's see where my unwavering passion, as Leanne describes it, led us to. Okay, so I'm just going to do a bit of context setting as well and look at where all this began, really. And I think we sort of heard from Leanne earlier that we know that sort of evidence highlights that the equal treatment of men and women doesn't equal sort of that we get those same outcomes, and that women in the criminal justice system present with very differing risk and needs. And yet, when you look at our provision and our sort of structured interventions and programmes and the toolkits, it doesn't always sort of reflect this. And there was, when I came into post in 2018, one of the things that underpinned the female offender strategy was developing a sort of gender-specific, trauma-informed and responsive sort of workforce, but it was also about what products, that we could use. And to me, there was a very clear gap that we needed a specific toolkit for women. So it started off quite small. It was going to be a small project in the Southwest. I got some Innovation Award funding in 2020 because what I wanted to do was I wanted to make sure that I collaborated with women in the criminal justice system across the women's centres, and that I was able to pay them for their input so that it wasn't just a case of extracting information. We have surveys and things like that, but I really wanted this to be quite an organic, really starting with the women and then involving other women as well, so academic specialists. And when I went out across the region talking to women and talking to practitioners, there was a very keen appetite for a toolkit, because probation practitioners wanted a framework to sort of structure and evidence their work. Women wanted this too. The women also wanted probation practitioners to really understand the impact of trauma on their lives and to take a really sort of curious approach when working with them, and they wanted them to not just sort of view them, because I think we've been in a very risk-led sort of culture, so they wanted to create a bit of that shift from, you know, and you'll hear this many times, not what's wrong with you, but what's happened to you, in order to really support their engagement. So as I said, moving on a little bit from there, the strapline has always been written by women in the criminal justice system for women in the criminal justice system. Bit of an upside down approach to writing a sort of toolkit. Normally they start, don't they, with all our academics and evidence and research. Yeah, a bit of a challenge to do it the other way, but I had the wonderful Claire on the team who kept me straight on that one. But as I've said, the whole thing really was about that collaborative approach, and the women in the toolkit wanted topics as well that were relevant to them. So we've got a part in there, maternal supervision, one around women working in the sex industry, you know, and these also, interestingly, were often topics that probation practitioners didn't feel so confident. They sort of found some of these quite difficult to broach because they were quite emotive to women. And the other thing the women really wanted, and we've embraced this within the toolkit, is that they didn't want all the exercises based on what I call linear verbal transactions. The women, you know, explain that if you're triggered and you're in that sort of fight, flight or freeze, or you're just finding it really difficult to engage, then trying to do that verbally is really, really hard. So they wanted what is described as sort of depth and breadth. So they wanted some creative things in there. They wanted some activities in there, and things that actually, you know, one woman described it to me. She said, I want things that make me smile, you know, and that really reflect who I am, you know, what I'm doing in my life, you know, and yeah, just sort of enjoyable to do as well. Okay, so that's a bit of the backdrop from where it started. So these were the inspirational drivers. To begin with, we had local women's centres across the sort of southwest, peer mentors, and these were all groups that were direct contributors to the toolkit. And as I said, as Claire joined, we also had sort of women's centres up in the West Midlands as well, and we had some academic and specialist writers, you know, women as well, who came in and also contributed. So Lucy Baldwin, if any of you have read Mother in Justice, who's up in I don't know if she's from the West Midlands, but anyway, thereabouts. So you know, we all sort of, these were really our inspirations around doing it. And of course I've got Claire and Lucy in there who've tolerated me very well over the last couple of years and really been supportive in getting this, and Leanne and Jason as well. Couldn't have done it without them. Okay, so these are the groups involved. So once we got it all together, you know, and sat thinking, okay, how do we get this into really good shape, you know, so that it's effective, we can roll it out, you know, it does what it needs to, sort of thing. And so these are just some of the groups that we involved in that consultation process: national and regional specialists, professional groups and teams. Some of you might be familiar with, we captured feedback from the internal expert voice panel. We went to some more slightly, you know, scary panels. They were for me: the Correctional Services Accreditation Advice Panel, the Toolkit Reference Panel, and the final one that were hugely supportive, and a big shout out to Laura Baverstock and her team, was the National Effective Interventions Panel, because that's really where they scrutinise everything about the toolkit and really pull it into shape to be utilised and make it that really qualitative product to go onto equip for everyone to use. Okay, so I'm now going to hand over to you, Claire.
Yeah, hi everybody. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the rationale behind it, and some of the words that you can see here are those principles that we had to overcome in that panel that Angela just spoke about. So if any of you are interested in writing anything in the future, of course me and Angela might try to put you off for some time, but really we would encourage you to do so. But with some warning, I guess, in that there is a lot of scrutiny, and rightly so, a lot of scrutiny that comes with any material or product that goes through to that panel. And one of the things that we had to do was give them a really strong and good solid rationale for how, why and for who the toolkit was intended to work. So I'm not going to bore you with the details of all the slides that we used for them, but hopefully give you a brief summary of that. So Leanne mentioned very early on the Corsten report from 2007, and hopefully some of you will have seen that. If not, I do urge you to go and look at it. There's a lot of evidence in there that Baroness Corsten pulls together, where she concludes that equal treatment does not indeed mean equal outcomes for women. But also in response to that, the Ministry of Justice produced the female offender strategy in 2018 that set out the government's commitment and intentions to work in a different way, so to work in a holistic approach towards women, which does take account of their social and welfare needs. And the idea behind that is all of the data and research that has recently been done on women does point to meeting those needs as being of primary importance to them being able to sustain desistance in the longer term. Really important to that was that the women that were used in those research studies identified that their experiences of trauma affected their ability to trust professionals that they came in front of, and that building a genuine therapeutic relationship with those professionals was the most effective way of engaging them. So when we talk about current research, probably lots of you will know that traditionally research around desistance, rehabilitation, and things like the R&R models all use data on men. And I could speak for hours on end to talk about how basically the whole of society will utilise data on men when planning anything. But what we found in recent years, actually this does women a disservice. And again, the Corsten report talks about this much better than I can. But the research that I did bring together, so Angela talked about pulling that evidence base together, does look at lots of those outcomes for women, and all of it points to what the women themselves told us, and that was that those two things, building the trust and having that therapeutic relationship, were really important to be able to support that woman through any intervention or period of supervision. So the why. So as I mentioned trauma briefly, but there's lots of statistics, and I'll just give you one of those brief ones. Women in the criminal justice system very often have histories that are littered with backgrounds of domestic abuse, childhood trauma, sexual abuse. For example, over 60% of those women report being victims of domestic abuse, and childhood abuse comes from all of the research around adverse childhood experiences, and the acronym for that is ACEs. So again, that's something else that you can go and look at. Clinicians do acknowledge the impact of women's experience of complex trauma, so that's ongoing and prevalent trauma throughout their lives, can have a massive impact on their mental health, on their use of substances, and does really point to their priority needs being quite distinct from what we traditionally understand to be relevant to offending. So I'll mention in a couple of slides actually where this outlines, I think it's 7 or 8, Angela will correct me in a moment, priority needs that are identified for women, and those needs need to be addressed in any effective outcomes throughout any period of work. So we were really passionate about aligning the work to all of those priority needs, and that's really clear throughout the toolkit. So hopefully in summary to all of that, what we found traditionally is that rates of recidivism, reoffending and engagements were really poor for women traditionally, and that we feel is because the work was targeted towards the needs of men rather than women. So what we hope is that this work will go some way in addressing those gaps and improving those outcomes for women moving forwards. In terms of for whom, so the toolkit encourages collaboration between the practitioner and the woman. So even though the toolkit is aimed and talked directly to the practitioner, what we really hope is that practitioners will sit down with the women that they're working with and talk together about the pieces of work that would benefit that woman. And it's really approached in that collaborative way, so that it meets her distinct and complex needs, because what we know is that they won't necessarily be the same as any other woman coming through the door. And it is also supported by Stephanie Covington's 5 core principles of working in a trauma-informed and responsive way. And again, if you don't know Stephanie Covington, she's got a lot of data and has done a lot of work extensively around the trauma-informed practice. But I think Angela has got a soundbite there with just a brief summary on those 5 principles. Thanks, Angela. Can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So, in overview, just as we've heard there, the toolkit is very much designed to be used in a flexible way. We intend for it to be delivered on a one-to-one basis with women, but it also does support the use of complementary digital media. So throughout the toolkit, there are opportunities to use videos and other media from the internet to support that delivery. Whilst it was primarily intended to be used at the beginning of an order or period of licence supervision, it can be used flexibly throughout the course of a community order or period of licence, and we will talk a little bit more about how that's used later on. It's quite front loaded or front end loaded, I think are the words that we use, which means there's a lot of guidance at the beginning, and again we'll talk specifically to that in a few minutes. But it's worth saying here that there is guidance around the assessment of those women, and what we hope is throughout those assessments the practitioner and the woman will be able to design what work needs to be completed to address her specific needs and risks. So as we've said a few times, it is meant to be used flexibly, and we do hope that it is seen as being responsive to those needs and those changing needs throughout any course of supervision that you're seeing her for. And we do stress that wherever possible, this should be delivered in person, face to face, so that we know through the course of the pandemic there has been moves to remote working, and I think there is some guidance out there around blended supervision and how that can be used. So there will be opportunities to use this in a way that kind of complements that blended supervision approach with women. But what we have heard from women directly is that where that work is completed face to face in building up that relationship, it is much more effective. So again, we've said a few times that the crucial part to this and what is really, really key and sits at the heart of it is that it is a gender specific, trauma informed and trauma responsive toolkit. So you probably have heard those words used lots of times before, but hopefully you'll see that it is key and it is a theme that runs throughout. So, in summary, the 4 main aims of the toolkit are to provide structure when working with the women, so that's to the benefit of the practitioners, to improve engagement at the start of an order, period of licence supervision, or as we said, throughout any contact with that woman, to increase her self-esteem and well-being, and to facilitate the engagement and building of that therapeutic alliance between the practitioner and the supervisor. Next slide, please. So I did say that I would show you some of the toolkit, and here are some screenshots from it, very few. What is worth saying here, again, to get through the accreditation panel and to meet all of the criteria that we had set out for us, we had to make sure that the material that was used was accessible. So we consulted, Angela more so, consulted with the HMPPS communications team. There were lots of requirements and lots of hoops that we had to jump through. But what's worth saying is that all of the material, all of the pictures, like the example in that very first column there, are from an HMPPS easy read picture gallery, which just means that it should be accessible to everybody, but also there are audio prompts that go alongside the visual aids that can be used for people. Also the colours, so you'll see when you look at the toolkit that it is colour coded, so each of those sections throughout the toolkit then transposes into the contents page at the beginning, so you will see quite easily at a glance when you decide what you want to use, you'll know quite easily where to find that. Those colours that have been used do meet the colour test, again set by HMPPS. I've already mentioned the videos, so there aren't any examples here, but throughout the toolkit you will see references to easy access videos, and again they have been used and tested quite a lot throughout the organisation. There is also, and I just wanted to highlight those last two columns. You'll see in the third column there's like one of the pictures of our contents page which shows the separate parts, and in the last column it refers to pathways and needs. So what we have at the front is very clear instructions when you've completed those assessments and decided what pathways that I mentioned earlier you want to address. You'll be able to see particularly which worksheets, which activities and from what sections those pathways are addressed throughout the toolkit, and again that will be colour coded, so it should be quite easy to navigate your way through. I think Angela already mentioned that there is a similar toolkit that has recently been launched and it aligns very well to that, so hopefully you shouldn't have too many difficulties in figuring that out. Thank you, Angela.
Okay, I think a little bonus in ours is that we've also popped in an OASIS guide, so that really gives you that sort of gender specific lens on writing an OASIS. So for those of you who are embarking on your probation careers and doing that, then there's a really good little guide at the beginning as well. Okay, so we needed to have, you know, I talked about forums of practitioners and women, and they sort of emerged into our test toolkit group. And basically, they work with us to help sort of, you know, develop this, because you need to make sure that, you know, you do involve probation practitioners, obviously women, along this journey going through all of those panels. And our group consisted of 24 probation practitioners, a blend from the Southwest and the Midlands, North meets South, wasn't it, in cyberspace. And they were all working with women, or they were from specialist teams or women's pods, I think people are calling them now, aren't they? And we held 9 meetings over 9 months. And what we did, you know, we split the toolkit into sections so that we could sort of work through those. They could try them with the women, and then we were able then to sort of capture the feedback, and we could then discuss the use of the toolkit, what went well, maybe not, you know, maybe what could be improved on, how they used it, you know, why, what it felt like using it, absolutely everything. And this was also a good way for us to capture that more indirect feedback from the women as well. So the women in this test toolkit group were ages ranging from 18 to 47. There was a whole range of offences, from theft, serious assaults, burglaries and fraud. The women were assessed across all risk categories. There was a mix of women on community orders, periods of licence supervision, and the women presented with a range of sort of complexities and needs, you know, multiple things going on in their lives. But what was the key sort of prevalent feature was that they all had sort of histories of trauma. which I'm sure you're not surprised about. Okay, so with this toolkit, Claire's already mentioned that we have put a lot of information in the front, which is very clearly written. It's comprehensive, but it's a real easy read, because we wanted everyone to be able to pick this up and use it. Yeah, so there's not any need for specific training to deliver this toolkit. That introductory section before you start using it, and I think also the National Effective Interventions panel put information about general use of toolkits on Equip as well. You know, we're saying that really, you know, read through those and you will get a really good sense of how to, you know, use this toolkit. And to support you further, each part, and there are 9 parts in total, have a section at the front, again, short, concise, easy read, you know, just about what the activity you're going to be doing. It explains it, it gives you a little bit of rationale and, you know, what it's hoping to sort of achieve. And there are also sort of skills practice sessions as well built into that. So there are 9 parts to this. The first part is getting started. That is what we're saying is your sort of mandatory part. The second part is well-being. We are really recommending you do some of that, because that's all about that grounding, settling, self-soothing, which really supports the woman engage. Part 3 is my relationships. Part 4 is the maternal supervision. Part 5, applying problem solving skills. Part 6, working in the sex industry. Part 7, thinking skills and future planning. Part 8, transitioning into adulthood. And the final part is resettlement. So it sort of covers that journey, and no doubt, you know, there might be opportunity to build on this toolkit as well. Okay, so who's it suitable for? Well, it's basically suitable for any adult female, 18 and over. What we're recommending, there are two groups we sort of, one we put a caveat on and the other we've mentioned, I'll come to in a minute, but what we're recommending is that probation practitioners should discuss with their managers any cases that do not identify with their gender assigned birth, and you may want to additionally consult with your regional transgender single point of contact and just sort of take some advice and have a look at this toolkit and maybe think, well, some sections might be suitable, you know, some not, but it's always worth stopping and just having a think around that and getting some advice. The other group that Claire's already mentioned, that we would say you need to use the other specific toolkit called First Steps to, no, Pathways, isn't it? Pathways to Change. That's it. I get them all muddled up. Pathways to Change. And that's the toolkit which is for women who've committed sort of offences of a sexual nature. So that's very sort of specific to them. So what we're suggesting is for you to consider the woman's risk of sort of reoffending category when determining the level of intervention that may be required. So, for example, a woman assessed with a low risk of serious harm, you know, with an OGA score under 25 and low complexity, may just need a sort of fewer sessions actually, as opposed to a woman assessed as high risk of serious harm with a sort of higher OGA score. So again, it gives you that flex to sort of tailor the number of sessions accordingly. Yeah. And again, we've sort of said, you know, it's really going to be about you collaborating with the woman, looking at the exercises, and then you and the woman you're working with actually making decisions around which exercises that you want to use, and again thinking around that flex around sort of you know, risk and need. There is absolutely no need to complete all of the exercises. It's not a toolkit that you've got to work through every single part. As I've said, we're saying part 1 is the mandatory bit, some sections from 2, and then it's rather like my favourite bag of sweets. Pick and mix your way through the other sections. You know, it may be that this woman has been working in the sex industry and wants to sort of review that and do some thinking around that, so you can use that, or something more around problem skills. You know, it's very much has that flex. It's not prescriptive in any way in relation to how those parts should be done. Each session takes about 30 or 40 minutes. However, as Claire's mentioned, you know, we are very fortunate, I think, to have a different way of working with women, because what some research and surveys were shown with women during COVID, that they actually liked having the phone contact. Some women found that they could go to a safer place to talk. They can pop in the video link. It will be in their workbooks, which are on Equip as a separate document, so they can sort of find those via phones if they have them. And, you know, again, so we're trying to build in as much flex as possible around it. Okay, so for those of you sort of working at court, I guess this has more of a focus that you will really need to ensure that, you know, work is sort of prioritised and sequenced with any other intervention work according to that woman's assessed risk and needs. And the toolkit is on the effective proposal sort of framework, so that you can consult that. And you know, all the intervention type is there, and there's a briefing for you. I think what we're clear to highlight is that, you know, this is a toolkit, and as with the other toolkits, it's not to be used in place of a sort of structured intervention or an accredited programme if that woman is assessed as sort of suitable. Yeah, but it can be used very much alongside to support that work. So, for example, it might be something that you think, I'm doing her OASIS, I'm going to look at those OASIS sections. There may be some sessions that you may want to do early on. Equally, she may go straight quite quickly onto that structured intervention. And, you know, it may be something that you want to do sort of afterwards, or even if there's a sort of, you know, gap in between. In addition, of course, it can be a standalone intervention sort of in its own right, and may really play a role for some individuals' support for that additional sort of change work, isn't it? I think they call it. And I'll come to CRS, which I think is well, I hope it's on the next slide. If not, I'll come back to it. Yeah, here we are. So you know, for women who are unable to access CRS, or are sort of waiting for that provision to begin, and we acknowledge there has been some delays in some areas, then first steps to change can be used in sessions. So you can almost start off, use this. I think for me, whilst we want it to have that flex, it really is something I think that you can pick up and use fairly quickly, because it just supports getting to know that whole sort of woman. Yeah. And as I've said, you know, that real sort of wraparound resource. In your assessment and sort of sentence planning area of your work, the toolkit provides some guidance for you around issues that are specific for women, including issues to consider, as we've said, when doing your sort of OASIS assessment. So it can really assist you in that whole assessment process and that sentence planning process. And the underpinning thing that we keep coming back to you is this toolkit is really around building that therapeutic alliance, you know, beginning to build trust, although we acknowledge that's really hard for some women, but just starting that rapport, and we'll really hopefully support you working confidently with that woman, because you'll be able to sort of evidence the work that you're doing. She will have her workbook and she will be able to evidence that too. Where rehabilitative activity requirements are concerned, you know, we are saying that the minimum number of days is 8. Okay, and of course we know that it's on ND. There is a specific NSI for this, so you can sort of, you know, record off those RAR days. And if you're not sure about that, we've also uploaded onto Equip a sort of step-by-step guide specifically, you know, for use of this toolkit. Okay. And as I've said, part 1 is sort of the minimum requirements. So it's quite a low number, and we know that women are inclined to sort of get those higher number of RAR days, but hopefully there's enough flex in the toolkit for you to be able to sort of use it and, you know, utilise it. Okay. So in sentence management, I think it'll be really great to really fully assess this woman, you know, really support her engagement, and we'll really sort of include sessions that you undertake around looking at you know, sort of risk, supporting compliance. I think it'll really help supporting increase sort of motivation. And also in the toolkit, there is not just activities and skills practice, but there's information. So there's lists of specific services, and again, these will be in her workbook, so they're sort of printed off, and she'll be able to keep them and take charge of that. Okay. Transfers. We know that this is a really difficult time for women, and it's often a real point where there's risk of them being recalled or breached. And that's again often because of, you know, we know that healing takes place in relationships when those relationships look as if they're changing, or you know, under any sort of risk of severance and what have you. That's a really difficult time. So what we've done is that we feel that the toolkit will really support this process, because again, you know, the woman is able to evidence what she has, what work she's been doing, and the sort of receiving probation practitioner will be able to sort of check on ND and look at probation records and just sort of see how much work has been done. And then hopefully the receiving probation practitioner will be able to sort of have that check-in, you know, just make sure, you know, where that woman's at. Does anything need to be repeated, or are you okay to sort of review what else? So I hope that you're really getting a sense of just the flex that we have tried to build into this to cover off as much as we can in relation to how you can utilise it, and also how the woman will benefit from that, you know, whilst in our care. Okay, so it's back to you, Claire.
Thank you. So we've talked about some of the points on this slide a little bit already. We have said already that what we hope, what we encourage is that all practitioners first complete part 1, which is helpfully called Getting Started, and then some elements of part 2, which is focused on well. But it's probably worth just explaining a little bit about the rationale behind that for those of you that haven't seen the toolkit, but it probably will be quite obvious when you see it. So part 1 focuses on getting started. So those sessions are based on getting to know that woman that you're working with. So it asks for you to both consider her past, her journey up to this point, to really think about her identity, the way that she sees things and approaches things, where she's comfortable to share that, and really gives that chance to start building that trust and that therapeutic relationship that we've talked about. In part 2, I think Angela mentioned this briefly earlier as well, part 2 that's focused on well-being has got some activities around things like grounding techniques, it's got coping strategies, it covers things like that. Now what we know is that the woman will always have lots of techniques that she already has learned. You know, she has survived and experienced so much trauma and has come through that. So actually sometimes it's just about identifying those strengths that she's already got and giving her the confidence and the self-esteem boost to acknowledge those. But where there are gaps or where there are things that you can maybe learn together around grounding, it's a really good opportunity to develop those skills, so that when she's doing work later on, either in that toolkit or if doing, say, an accredited programme or another intervention that she might really struggle to deal with, she's got then those skills already to refer back to. So that's the reason that we ask for that. And then after that, so that the further delivery, again, we've already briefly mentioned this, and Angela's helpfully kind of listed those other parts. So parts 3 to 9 are specialist sections. We don't expect that all women that you work with will need to do each of those. We don't even expect that all activities in any of the sections will need to be completed. It is really a judgment call, but again, it comes back to this point of both you and the woman talking and collaborating together to decide what needs to be done. And I guess the final thing for me to say to this slide, again, is just referring to that guidance right at the beginning around OASIS and assessing what those needs and risk factors might be for that woman. It's probably worth saying here that you'll find that throughout the toolkit there is no reference or exercises directly speaking to offences or offending, so there's no offence focused work in here. That was intentional for all the reasons that we've already outlined, but I think Angela mentioned earlier we may indeed look at bolt-ons or filling those gaps with offence focused work later on, but if there are specific needs that are identified, certainly if that woman has already been sentenced and there's another intervention that has already been highlighted, then that's where that work would take place. Okay, can we go on to that? Oh, we are on the next one. So we've already talked quite a bit about the toolkit taking on a holistic and strengths-based approach. We can't stress that enough, really. And I guess one piece of advice, if you take anything away from today, is where you've got the time, just go and have a look at the toolkit. Lots of it will make sense when you get a chance to look through it and see what we mean. But it is worth saying here, as the slide suggests, there are sessions that focus on building and practicing skills. So for example, where there's an exercise that looks at super strengths, what it means to be me, self-care, grounding techniques and safety planning. And there's also opportunities throughout healthy relationships, maternal impact, risk assessing and resettlement. So you get throughout all of those opportunities to identify and then practice those skills both in and out of session. There is also a focus on recognising and managing emotions, because we know that lots of people that have experienced trauma, their brains can play tricks on them and they can really struggle both to listen to what those emotions are and really understand them, but also then to be able to manage them in a proactive way. So by building those skills, we hope that it encourages that woman's sense of self-efficacy, but also self-esteem. So those are really key to all of that, but we do it in a way that it is accessible for people with various different learning styles and various different needs. So you will probably see that the same skills or the same strengths are referred back to several times throughout the toolkit, but maybe approaches those in a slightly different way. So even though I think I've mentioned, even though there's no offence focused work, what we do hope is that these skills are developed and practiced throughout the toolkit, do address those criminogenic needs that a woman has, and particularly aligns with all of those pathway needs that we talked about very, very early on. And I think that are even listed actually in the introduction of the toolkit, that in themselves will support her assistance process. And so even if it feels like things aren't specific in certain sections, it really is about giving you opportunities to open and start those conversations with her. Okay, next slide. And I think it's back over to you, Angela.
Yeah, I was going to say, Claire, there are games in here. There's the big game card, isn't there? And then we've also put in the section on working with women in the sex industry, there's something called the bags I carry, and that came from the women who were working as sex workers, and described about all their different identities and what they put in their bags, and it just really captured our imagination. You know, and there are not many toolkits that are able to sort of really utilise those lived experiences and to bring them to life in a sort of, you know, fun way for you to use. Okay, so it's me, right? Okay, so as you saw, having gone through all those panels, there was no way we were going to sort of escape a really rigorous evaluation. And so as this now, you know, sits with the approved sort of suite of probation practitioner toolkit, it's subject to ongoing review. We're sitting across several forums where that happens. It's evaluated against its stated aims and objectives, and they run sort of tracker lists in relation to use. I have to say, I do get quite competitive about that when I hear about the other newly launched toolkits. I'm going, come on for the women. But anyway, that's really useful. And what we've done as well is that in this toolkit for you, there is a link through a QR code. So you can hold up your work phone, you can even hold it up to your computer screen. A great fun playing with this. And it'll take you straight to the feedback form. So you don't have to log in, things like that, really easy. And equally, it's on the woman's worksheets so that she can do that totally privately, totally on her own. And again, it was really for us about going right back to those origins and capturing, you know, what the women want to say and how they want to improve this, or what's worked for them, what not, what we maybe need to develop. But she can do that totally independently. Okay, so I've mentioned about, you know, we're going to capture all that data off NSIs. We've also got we're going to have ongoing sort of probation practitioner forums, and I think when we get into reviewing, as with the other toolkits, we'll get a sense of what those look like. I think we'll probably try and capture groups across regions now that we've got these emerging women's pods, or anyone with a specific interest. Actually, I think it's good to have a really diverse group of you know, women, which we manage to do. And of course, you know, we're capturing a lot of feedback from regional women's leads like Claire and myself. So, you know, if you just are someone who prefers to pick up the phone, then you know, you can do. And there are all those other ways we can see what impact it has. So, for example, I would anticipate we might do some dip sampling around OASIS and just seeing, you know, whether they're being written in that sort of more gender specific trauma informed way, PSRs and things like that. But, you know, for me, it's all about the women. It's all about those peer mentors and just making sure that we continue to you know, bring it right back to the starting point and make it work for them. Okay, so this is the fun bit when I get to press these buttons again. So I'm just going to play one bit of feedback from a probation practitioner, and then I'll play one from one of the peer mentor facilitator groups, and she just sort of speaks out loud the feedback she had got from some of the women. So let's hope this works.
Is anything happening? Because I can't hear anything.
Oh yes, can you hear Claire? Yeah, I think
I could hear it.
Yeah, I could hear it.
Might be your connection.
Do I need to press on them? Because it looks I can actually press.
No.
No, you don't need to, but you might turn your volume up on your laptop, see if your volume's down. Because Angela presses them and then everybody should hear it.
I couldn't hear it, and I can hear you guys really loudly.
Yeah, same.
Okay, so we've got 2 people who can't hear it. Well, if I just play the woman's feedback one, but you know, yeah, we've got a lot who can hear. So if I'm really sorry, guys, if I continue to play, sometimes it's if you're listening through headphones. So I'll play the last one anyway, and we can give a bit of a summary. Okay, so for those who couldn't hear, basically the feedback from the women was they liked it because it really encouraged practitioners to see them as the language they use was a person and not a problem. And so that was it. And then they gave feedback on one of the exercises, which I do a lot of, I have to add, just because I love chocolate. And it's a chocolate meditation exercise. And then what the practitioners were saying, she was just picking out one of the sections where the woman is asked to review healthy relationships, but it's not just about partner, it's about sort of brother and other family members. So it's just a little bit of direct feedback. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is we're going to come back in the room. I'm going to stop presenting, and then Claire and I, who haven't been able to see any of the chat or anything like that, and Leanne and Jason will come on, and we'll invite you all in to put your cameras on so we can say hi in cyberspace, and hopefully we'll be able to answer some questions or observations if there are any. Thank you.
Can I just pick up, Angela? So while you were talking, there were a couple of questions that I answered immediately, but there's a couple that I didn't get back to that I thought might be useful for the whole group to discuss. So the first one, Claire, I don't know whether you want me to read the question out, or if you're happy to, you can come on and ask the question yourself. This was in relation to delivery in prisons. Is Claire there?
Hi, yeah, I don't mind if you could read it out, please.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah.
So
it's Claire from our group, is it?
So
Good.
Claire asks, why are probation practitioners not allowed to deliver these toolkits to women in prison? There are currently no one-to-one interventions for probation practitioners to deliver in women's prisons. What provisions or interventions are going to be offered to women in prison which probation practitioners can deliver one-to-one? So Angela, I don't know whether you want to speak to that first, and then I'll come.
Yes, this is one we do get, and I think, Claire, the simplest way of putting it is that you had a sense of the sort of governance that we had to take the toolkit through to be able to sort of deliver it in the community. To be able to do that in the prison, it involves, I quickly learnt, a very different set of sort of governance, and it was very psychology led, and my personal, and this is my personal observation, everyone's going to hold their breath now in case I say something wrong, but it was that it was very much more about I guess the simplest way of putting it is sort of doing to. It was going to be a process whereby it was more about delivering to the women, as opposed to where we started from, which, as I said, was about the women writing for other women. And so there was just you know, not going to be enough time for us to do this toolkit for the community. And we did have meetings with those in custody because there was an appetite for it. But it was just that it was going to need to take a different shape or form. And I think for me, you know, my priority had to sit with getting something for, you know, staff to use working with women in the absence of there being no other structured intervention, you know, program or anything sitting in that sort of suite of toolkits for staff to use in the community. So that's just an honest answer from me. There might be a Claire or Jason.
Yeah, so I think, yeah, as Angela covered, it is a conversation that we had early on, and I think that there is a need and is an appetite to have products out there for staff to use with women whilst those women are in prison. I think, added to what Angela said, there are other products that have recently been launched for the prison space. The resettlement packs is an example of that, and with the short sentence function teams and pre-release teams coming on board, there'll also be pieces of work that they're doing. And we have to be really careful when you create any new product that you're not stepping on the toes of other people or contradicting what is happening in a different space, because obviously that's not helpful for the women, but it's also can be really confusing for the staff doing that. So it just became too difficult, I guess, in the end. And that's not to say it will never be considered for use in prison. I think the potentially is room for it in the future. We just need to see what other products land in prison and then see what space there is left and what we do into that space. But I think, as Angela said, I had a real concern early on, particularly with the pandemic and the way that operations changed into prisons, that these might be things that just get given to women to complete in cell, like distraction packs that they had. And that obviously isn't the purpose of this toolkit, and we didn't want it to be used in that way. But we would have no control over ensuring that without kind of monitoring it closely, which of course we can't do. But I think the other point is, because the toolkit talks a lot to trauma, and there's a lot of research out there about the impact of trauma on women in custody, and links very closely to things like the rates of self-harm for women in prison and stuff like that. So as Angela said, potentially for this to work for women in prison, we'd probably have to look at issues slightly differently, or introduce new concepts, or talk about different things, which again then wouldn't work for women in the community. So yeah, we haven't ignored women in prison. I think there's still a big space, but it just wasn't appropriate at this time.
Okay, thank you very much for both answering that.
No problem. And then, Angela, there was another quick one, and then I will shut up, I promise.
I was just going to add a bit to Claire's comment that oh, forgotten her name. She ran an insights event about a programme they're delivering around anger, and they're using that in the custodial estate. So there does seem to be some work going on and some programmes that are available. Sorry, Claire.
No, that's fine. So there was another question. I really didn't want people to think that I was ignoring them. Donna asked the question about whether the slides would be available after today.
Donna, these slides are very much owned, because this is an insight sort of event. You know, they've been sort of compiled for insights and sort of submitted in there. I know that recordings are going to go out. So I am making an assumption that some sort of slide deck will go alongside that, but that's sort of within their gift, because obviously it's part of their event as it opposed to being sort of ours as such. But there is definitely going to be these recordings made available. I don't know where they're going to put them, actually, whether they put them on My Learning or somewhere. I'm sure they'll announce that, but you will be able to re-listen to us.
And also, Angela, just to add, we'll have the list of attendees, so we can circulate sort of personally ourselves the recording as well, so that people have got a copy of that. I also mentioned just in the chat, just on what the point that you just made around the slides, about sort of the local delivery of the SPO sort of regional leads. They'll be delivering a sort of a version of it as well.
Yes, that's right. I noticed Laura Billings has put a comment on about, you know, it's a good introduction, but what's going to be done. So I think it's sort of it's sort of a gift that we've sort of started off, that the HMPPS women's team has got behind. There are going, you know, there's been an intranet sort of article, you know, and now it's a gift that will be passed on to your regional SPOs. And I know from the group that, you know, they're already, you know, handing this out, and we'll be delivering it, you know, maybe to courts teams. I mean, that's going to be decided in your regions, so don't worry, you know, you can, you know, re-listen to this as well.
Yeah, and helpfully Gillian's put a comment in the chat to say, Gillian comes from Insights, to say that the presentation and recordings will be available to everybody through the Insights website soon as well. There is already an article that Leanne helpfully put together that's on the intranet that takes you hopefully to the link on Equip, where there'll be lots of process maps and guidance around toolkits generally, but does obviously include this toolkit as well. And then we've all had to gruelingly go through sessions of recordings this week, so yeah, that will come out soon. But if you, I think I mentioned earlier, and I know it was a comment that Jason made at a similar event yesterday, that I think the best thing to do is get an opportunity to take a look at it. It really is, I mean, I'm saying this probably from a biased perspective, but it really is accessible, and hopefully when you see it, maybe even have a go at a couple of the activities. I know I did that just to see how it landed for me, and it will kind of become self-explanatory, and you will gain the confidence with it quite quickly, I feel. But if going through it you have got any further questions or concerns, please reach out to your regional women's leads in your area. I think every area has one now, and if you can't do that or you don't have one, then equally, you know, we're more than happy to take calls or emails with questions on after today. So the lines are open.
I think go to Equip, guys. That's like our Google. So as things get you know, updated, or if there are any changes, obviously that, you know, it sits under the accredited suite of probation practitioner toolkits. So we're in their forums. You know, we're very much guided by them, and that's your really sort of go-to. So I know, you know, sometimes there's that temptation, isn't there, to download one and then you keep that for years and years. I dig out things now which I had about 20 years ago, but you know, I think it's really important that we've got Equip. You know, we've got the hub as well, haven't we, that takes us to links, and I think everything is sort of there for you. It's a really easy, we've had brilliant feedback around that. It's a really good, easy flex toolkit to use.
There's also a question on there from Eleanor which relates to limitations. Eleanor, do you want to ask the question yourself?
Yeah, I can do, I don't mind. So it's just more about, is there any women or any factors that might prevent engagement, or whether it's appropriate for any women?
I think we've put a caveat, haven't we, Claire, around women who might be perpetrators of domestic abuse. I had a query yesterday. When you talk about limitations in who the toolkit is appropriate for, I think there's always that sort of cautionary, you know, have a look, you know, has she been a victim? Have that discussion with your sort of line manager. That's one thing. So there is that. We've talked about those, you know, the transgender sort of cases that maybe some of you are working, you know, seek some advice about that. There may well be some exercises and activities that you can use, but I think it's always worth checking. And the only other limitation is around women who've committed offences of a sexual nature, because there is a specific toolkit called Pathways to Change, also on Equip, with its own workbook. You've got here, are there any factors which would impact on a woman's interaction or engagement with this toolkit? No, I would, you know, I mean, that's quite a big question. I am really hopeful that the feedback we've had so far is that the women have come in, and I spoke to someone yesterday and she thought she was going to get this whole list of stuff, questions to answer and what have you, but instead her probation practitioner sat down with her and played what is in the toolkit called the big card game. And that was asking her things like, what's your favourite thing to eat? You know, what's your favourite celebrity and why? Why do you like, you know, what's your favourite colour? It was just actually that bit of feedback around seeing her as a person first and foremost. And the woman was really, I mean, they laughed, you know, she was describing how she was sort of really enjoying it. And then they went on, there's another one called Strengths, Internal and External, and you can do that on a bit of paper. So it's quite visual. There are collages. So instead of a lifeline, we encourage you to do like a life collage. You may have to seek out some sort of old magazines from Chums. Your interventions team might have some things like, you know, big A4 pens, sellotape, whatever you need. But, you know, so that's not about having those discussions. It's around, you know, really being creative. So I'm really hoping that it will really support engagement with the women. Claire, can you think of anything on that? Or yeah.
No, I mean, I suppose it's not going to be a helpful answer, because what I want to say is that there can always be factors that affect a woman's engagement with anything, whatever you go in intending to discuss, you know, and I guess the same could be said for men. You know, we all have bad days or something happens and we think, God, I'm really not in the mood today. And I think sometimes in the feedback that we heard on that very last page from the practitioner, which always makes me smile when she said, oh, I feel like I actually tricked her into doing some work without her knowing. Sometimes it's just the way that you approach that conversation, and actually you're completing a piece of work, if you like, or having a really important conversation without either of you realising that you're doing work sometimes. So sometimes it's about the way that you approach it, but also, I guess, going to that back to that point of collaboration, if you have built that relationship up and that element of trust up from the beginning, then that woman will be quite receptive to those conversations that you're having with her. And if today really isn't a good day for a particular conversation, I'm sure she'll be the first to tell you.
I think for a lot of women, trust is always one of those things, isn't it? Because if they've had that level of betrayal of trust throughout intimate relationships where they look to someone to care for them and love them, we know the prevalence around domestic abuse, then sometimes that's a really big ask when power plays out so openly in our relationships. But I think that's around you know, about being transparent almost right from the start. It's rather like how I talk about building an altar. I do this exercise around building an altar, and it's how we encourage women, you know, what's it going to look like when you exit? So it's around just having those, you know, these are the boundaries. What does this need to look like for you? I love it when I read contingency plans, and one of them I read in an Oasis, which was a woman coming, you know, what would breach look like for her? And that contingency plan was saying like, okay, so if she disappears, what she's going to do is she will put a note in, a stick-it note, you know, in each day just to go, okay, and she would put a Christian name on it. And you know, then she had to appear, or that meant that, you know, that probation practitioner would go to breach. So, you know, I think it's around, we know that women disengage, and the highest percentage of it is around women's failure to keep in touch, as opposed to men, where it'll be around risk paralleling behaviour or committing further offences. So again, that really speaks volumes around, probably one of the main barriers is around that lack of trust, is around that, you know, the whole relationship thing is so important for women, hence why this toolkit is really focused on supporting developing that relationship, and you know, in a really creative way that the women want, and what's worked for the women. Oh, that took us a long time to answer that one, didn't it? As you can tell, we can go on and on. Okay, any other questions from anyone?
I've just seen one more pop up from Charlotte, and she says, you just mentioned about suitability and DV perpetrators. Please, can this be expanded as it's not in the suitability section in the toolkit?
I think there's just a sort of caveat in there about that if you have a woman who has committed domestic abusive you know, those sort of nature of offences against her partner, around the appropriateness of, you know, working with her through that domestic abuse section, because the domestic abuse section, I suppose, is written from the perspective of the woman that you're working with being a victim / survivor of you know, domestic abuse, no matter what form that takes. And I think what we've recognised, and I feel another toolkit coming on, is that, you know, we do need to start looking, particularly post-COVID, whereby we had far more offences of women committing domestic abusive offences against their partners and frontline workers in the process of them being arrested. So there seems to be this emerging prevalence of women committing offences of an assaultative nature. You know, if you're like me, I like looking at criminal justice statistics, and you can see a real you know, shift in that's happened over the past 2 years, and they're just going through court. So I think there's that cautionary note, but yes, you know, I feel that that's almost another toolkit in its own right, really. Claire, anything to add on that?
No, nothing at all. I mean, there is lots, I'll be going off on a tangent a little bit, but there is lots of research out there about women being victims of domestic abuse very often before committing offences themselves. So there's not a clear answer to it. I guess the trick in this is you getting to know that woman and knowing what issues are relevant for her and addressing them then appropriately. So, you know, if there is that element of that woman being the abuser or committing those assaults against other people, and the way that those worksheets or activities are kind of worded, or the perspective of them doesn't really fit for her circumstances, then of course don't use them. Charlotte's put a comment in the chat about there's a structured intervention available in some regions now for women with domestic abuse offences, which there is, and I know there's some work going on some of those, and there might be more that comes out in the future. That's not to say that some of the work in there won't be relevant to her if she has got experiences of being a victim herself. Then of course there's lots of that will be relevant as well, and indeed other sections of the workbook could be suitable and appropriate for it either way. There's another question. So Donna, any recommendations for being able to work on this toolkit or do offence focused work when women are often coming into their appointments in a crisis, so having to deal with situations as they arise?
Yeah, okay, this is really interesting one for me, Donna, because I don't know if and I would ask your SPO sort of women's leader around the Becoming Trauma Informed workshop, because what we know around the impact of trauma is that it informs people's sort of feelings and behaviours. And you're absolutely right. Sometimes it can be really difficult. Women will come in and let me give some examples. So they can present like a tortoise with a shell. They can be very, very quiet and, you know, very vigilant. And, you know, this often results from an example, a woman who was listening, you know, she used to listen to her partner drive up the road, how he pulled into the curb, how he turned the car off, how he put the handbrake on, how he shut the door, how he took the first step out, how the key went in the lock. So she was really vigilantly quiet all the time. It was really quite difficult. You get other ones that come in, like you've described, they're a bit like a dart in the room, you know, and often they're sort of, well, this has happened and I need to get my benefit and I can't get Johnny from school and I don't have food and I need to move my flat and I've fallen out. So, you know, and it's very much like the dart in the room. Yeah. Or you can get them coming in there really, really sort of hyper aroused, really angry. The impact of trauma has often I mean, I think if you're seeing women in offices, I regularly see women being triggered by coming in. It could be a noise, it could be, we have posters that talk about, you know, violence will not be tolerated. That can be quite triggering for women going in with men or what have you. And because of the level of complex trauma that women experience, it's very, very difficult for them at times to sort of emotionally regulate. And so I think that if you haven't done it, it's worth trying to get a space on that, because there are sometimes some very simple grounding techniques. Again, they are in the workbook. One of them is around the 5 senses. 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, 1 thing you can taste. And sometimes the starting point, getting started in part 1 and the well-being in part 2, is simply around trying to encourage that woman to come in and just sort of regulate. Emotional regulation kits are good as well, little things, and I use Fizzy Fish, pick and mix, sweets, things like that. But, you know, emotionally regulate and ground, so that's in the toolkit, you know, and you may have to deal with a crisis or something and then put that away, get her in that sort of settled space, and then just try and do something, you know, with her. But there are a range of sort of grounding techniques. I mean, even I've seen people, I had one woman who got through 2 litres of water, you know, and you know, just because she had to drink to ground, and then she'd go to the toilet and come back and we'd do a bit more and whatever, you know. So you know, I think it's try and think what's within your gift, but in the toolkit we do give some you know, skills to hopefully help you settle these women so that they can pick up, and you know, you'll be able to do some work. And it's different, it's going to feel different as well, and sometimes they're quite intrigued with that, or they were when we did it. So I don't know, it's quite a big question, but it's almost like go and try and see if you can source that workshop, because it's really worth doing.
I will, thank you.
Did that help, Donna?
Yeah, definitely. It's because it's something I've been struggling with a lot, because I'm training, I am at the moment, so I've got a lot of observations and things from management, and one thing that keeps coming up is that I need to start doing proper either offence focused work or real, you know, official intervention. And because I've been like firefighting really every time they come in,
Yeah.
I'm dealing with the crisis on hand every time, trying to offer practical support, doing the referrals and that sort of thing. And I feel like I'm really missing out on doing this kind of toolkit.
Yeah.
So I need to start like learning really how to settle, like calm them, so that instead of keep putting it off to the next session, because they'll, you know.
Yeah, because it is a deflection, and it probably is behaviour resulting from trauma. So they come in, they're anxious, they're probably triggered, so they're going to be like that. Well, this and that, you know, and you know, I think it's really important. It's not about that they're being manipulative or demanding or what have you. It's just because they come from that place of complex trauma. They're probably trying to seek an attachment, you know, get their needs met, which it sounds like you're doing really well in one way. But yeah, it's about that grounding and settling and self-soothing. I think you hear a lot of speak around that, and then just trying to introduce it. You know, they're short little activities you can do, and that evidences your work. You know, so you can say, well, this is a toolkit, it's part of the suite, I'm evidencing the work that I'm doing.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Okay, good luck. Come back to me if any problems. Happy to chat.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks, Angela. Lots of snippets of wisdom in there.
I try.
I will just, before I sort of we've got sort of 10 minutes left of the session before I sort of close up. I'll just see if there's any no more questions have come through in the chat, and I can't see any hands up, but I'll just double check if there's any more comments or observations that anyone's got for Angela.
Yeah, sorry, Claire's had to go, so thanks, Claire.
In that case, then, Andrew, is there anything else from you that you wanted to add or share?
No, just go and you know, give it a good flick through, you know, try it, and you know, go and sort of you know, we're really interested in the feedback. Try the little thing on your phone, you know, or the link, you know, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from you. Is the Trauma Informed Practice Workshop e-learning? No, it's something that the regional SPOs should be rolling out across your regions. So find out who your women's lead is. If there are any problems, just come back to me, because I'm running them frequently still at the moment. So I've had people from Leeds and everywhere today. It's been great this morning. Okay, so that's fine. Thank you very much.
Cheers. Thank you, Angela. So in that case then, firstly, I'll just begin by saying a huge thank you to both Angela and Claire for sharing this fantastic product with us today. And of course, as we know, all the blood, sweat and tears that went into developing it. As mentioned in the presentation, and I think we've covered it in the chat, the toolkit is available on Equip. I've posted the link, but you can also find it through searching approved toolkits in the search bar on Equip. Also posted the internet article that went live this week. It's still up there as well, so if you go onto the internet homepage, you will see the first steps to change article. I will just sort of round off by, I guess, sort of giving just a sort of overview of what's happening from the Central Women's team. So there's lots of things in the pipeline around, lots of exciting things, sorry, in the pipeline around working with women. Currently, we're working with the MOJ to consider the progress that's been made since the publication of the Female Offender Strategy. And in the sort of coming month or two, we'll be looking to launch a new and sort of focused delivery plan. So you'll see that sort of popping up in the near future. Also, from an HMPPS perspective, we're working with colleagues within EPSIG to design some sort of new products to support and guide practitioners working with women. And this includes things such as a new court report aid memoir and women specific guidance around CRS referrals. So there's lots happening in the background that we hope will sort of be out with you shortly. We're also working with the learning and development teams to develop an exciting new training package, and that's to replace what you may have heard was the power training, and this was a training package for prison and probation staff working with women, so that's sort of kicking off very shortly as well. As a central team, we're keen to engage with practitioners working with women, so please do look out for any upcoming communications such as intranet articles, newsletters, and opportunities to join any workshops over the coming months. So to wrap up, thank you again to our presenters today for what has been a really inspiring session, and thank you to you all for joining us and sticking with us when we are only a few hours away from the weekend. So yeah, so when the weekend arrives, I hope you'll have a good one. Oh, I've just seen one more question pop up. Can I ask why the power train's been replaced? It's a review that's sort of taken place for us to sort of update and sort of make it sort of more make it fit for purpose. Lots of work will be going into that, and I think there'll be opportunities for workshops, but we'll be able to share more on that sort of in the coming months around sort of the power review training. But unless there's anything else, we will I'll leave it at that today. Thank you all again, and enjoy your weekend when it arrives.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Take care, everyone. Nice being with you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.